everybody, it's Matt from the house, and today we'll talk a little bit about waxing up your board and keeping this thing maintained so it's nice and fast every single day you go ride. Let's check this out. All right, right off the bat, one of the biggest questions people want to know how often you should wax your board. It's really just a personal preference. Some people wax their boards every day, every time they go out. I rarely wax my board. Feels like you're going slow, wax your board. Another good thing that's just a telltale thing to say, like, you definitely should wax your board is when you start to get a little bit of a white fuzz, kind of almost like a faded look on the, on the edges of your boards. That's where most of the pressure comes on your board when you're on your edges, and it's basically when it starts to get that white fuzzy kind of look, and you run your finger on it and you can kind of scratch it a little bit. It almost looks like you're scratching it. That means that the base is drying out and it's probably time to get some wax in there. So big misconception on boards too is that when you wax a board is that your wax is actually on your board. Your wax is actually, you want it to be in your base. The base of your snowboard is a porous surface, and you want that wax to be in the board, not on it. Then when your wax is on top of the board, it actually could slow you down because it's actually creating dimension to the top of your board. That's why scraping is a super, super important thing to do. A lot of people always ask, you put the wax on and then you scrape it off. Why? And that's why, is because when we're actually melting the wax into the board, we're getting the wax melted into the board. And the more the wax is in the board, the better it is. When you're on the snow, you're basically, friction is melting the snow, and then you need that wax to repel it. Other than that, it's sticking to the base of your board. You're trying to pick a piece of glass up off a wet counter, it creates suction. Kind of the same thing here. If there's nothing to repel that, it slows you down because your board is sticking to the snow instead of actually moving on the top of it. So again, if you want to wax your board every single time you go ride, go for it. It's up to you. But if you start to see your board getting that white fuzz, again, mostly along the edges, you might see it along the tip and tail too, usually it's a good time to wax your board. Okay, right off the bat, you're gonna see there's a lot of products out there to wax your board. You don't need everything. If you're into it, you're into it, and you know what you need. There's a lot of little tools here and there. But main things to keep the board up to date and keep it, keep it moving fast. You need wax, you need a scraper, you need an iron. Base cleaner's good. Get into a brush or some cork. Again, something that it's nice to have, but you don't absolutely need to have it. But again, as long as you've got your wax, you've got your iron, you got your scraper, that's the most important thing. The other thing too is a lot of people always ask about the different kinds of wax. So, and I always tell them if it's easier to put on, it's not gonna be as durable. The harder it is to put on, the longer it's gonna last, the more durable it's gonna be. So you'll see a lot of rub down waxes and speed sauce and stuff like that, where the speed sauce is nice because you can literally just wipe it on your board, let it sit in the cold for a minute, harden up, you're ready to go. The rub down wax, it's a little more, durable than the speed wax. You basically rub it on your board, and then there's a little pad in there to kind of create some friction, like a scouring pad to create some friction to help smooth it out and, maybe melt it a tiny, tiny bit, but not nearly as much as taking an iron and, melting the wax into your board. So these are awesome to have. I always say get a rub down wax, get a speed wax, keep it in your bag, keep it in your car. You get out on one of those days you forgot to wax your board, or it just feels like it's, you're not moving fast, you just need a little bit more speed. Those are nice because you can literally do it at your car, and you don't need all the other tools. But at home, a lot of people, it's kind of a thing every year, especially that first wax of the year. You get all your stuff out, getting excited for the season, hot wax your board, make sure that it's ready to go. Okay, so before you wax your board, there's definitely a few things you can do to prep it, to get ready to wax it. And those main things are gonna be, some base cleaner and edging too. So, if your edges don't feel like they need to be sharpened, no reason to. Good way to tell too is you take your fingernail and kind of 45-degree angle, just kind of rub it on the edge of the board. If it peels your fingernail up and you get a little bit of that, usually it's pretty sharp. Or again, if you just feel like you need to do it a couple spots too, because it might feel sharp here, but not up by your contact points. But just check it out. you can use. Obviously, we have a few different edger tools on the website. This one actually is a pretty cool one. It actually does the side and the top, or and the bottom, I guess, at the same time. But all of these edgers work. I like to use this one because it has small files, and with any of the boards with the magnet traction, those wider files, they don't get into the grooves as much. You check out, I know Dakine makes a mini tuner. You know, a lot of the companies do. They'll make the regular size tuner, which is about that wide, and then they also make the mini tuners that have the little small files, so they get into where the magnet traction is. And these are pretty easy too. A lot of them you can kind of set the angle 90 degrees, pretty standard, but it's basically just set that thing right on the board and you put pressure down and that way, and then you just kind of drag it along the board. You know, you'll do that a few times. It's nice to have a wire brush nearby too. You can actually take the brush and kind of clean some of those metal shavings out of there. But do that a few times until your edge feels good, and then that's ready to go. And then before you wax the board, if your board is dirty, base cleaner. Base cleaners are nice because they do tend to eat up a lot of that old wax and get it out of your board. They basically melt it down. But it's pretty easy. Some people like to use it, some people don't. Some people like to leave the wax that's in their board in there because it, you know, they figure it stays in there. It's not bad to have wax down inside your board. So it's up to you. I usually use the base cleaner on boards that have been waxed improperly and there's big clumps of wax on it. Scrape it off, clean it a little bit. Or if your base is just dirty, use the base cleaner, and it's just as easy as paper towel until it's clean. And then, but the one thing with that is this stuff will evaporate. Make sure that it fully evaporates before you wax, because if it's still wet on top of your board and you go to put wax on there, it's just gonna eat away at that wax and it's not gonna work as well. So hot waxing your board, it's pretty easy. We have waxing irons that are very specific. They definitely work better. It is a little bit of an investment right off the bat. I mean, they're not crazy expensive, but having a waxing iron is nice because one, you're not ruining your iron for your clothes. As soon as you put wax on your iron for home, you're not using it for anything else. The other thing too is that irons that you iron clothes with usually have all the holes in the bottom of it. When you've got this nice flat surface, you get a much more even spread, and it's just easier to get that wax melted, and you spend less time actually waxing the board and melting the wax into the board, just because you do get a nice even spread out of that nice flat base. So right off the bat, we don't need to use a ton of wax. What I always do is I usually start with the edges. That's where you need most of the wax. It's the area that gets most of the pressure. So you're gonna basically get your iron, turn it on. There's gonna be a temperature adjustment. I don't know if you can see this in the video, but it is smoking right now. And if it's smoking, that means that it's a little too hot. So you basically wanna get that dial set to the point where it's gonna melt the wax, but the wax isn't, it's not smoking off of the iron. So once you get that set, you're basically gonna take your wax, push it against the bottom of the iron, and you're just gonna drip it. So I like to drip kind of along the edges a little bit, getting hung up on the binding there, and a little bit along the tip. Go right down the edge. It doesn't have to be perfect. You're gonna melt all this in anyway. But once you go down the edges, the other thing I like to do is kind of a zigzag across the board as well, just to make sure we get enough wax so we're not spending too much time scraping and too much time actually melting the wax and spreading it out. So you don't have to use a lot. And usually I like to take a couple drips on the nose, a couple drips on the tail. You don't really need to wax the nose and the tail a lot unless you're getting into some deep snow. It's more important to have from contact point to contact point. That's the most important thing. So once you've got it dripped on there, again, along the edges, all the way through, now comes the fun part. You want to keep the iron moving, and you basically just smooth out that wax and basically get it so it goes from edge to edge. And again, always make sure that the iron is moving. If you leave it in one spot, you'll damage your board. You know, these boards, they get a lot of heat when they're pressed and they're built. And if you put all that heat in one area again, it can actually make the board fall apart. I've actually seen it happen. The board starts to delaminate from the inside. So never ever leave your iron sitting flat down in one spot. And again, don't push it and leave it there. Always keep it moving. I like to do small circles. There's no right or wrong way to do this as long as you get that wax melted. It's good if you have a light off to the side, here or here, like I've got. But something where you can actually get down and you can actually see the wax and make sure that you have the entire base covered and you're not missing any holes here and there. So, so we're gonna smooth this out, and our boy Scotty is he's gonna speed this up right now. Okay, once you got this thing pretty smoothed out, you check in the light, make sure you didn't miss any spots. You know, and if you do notice that you don't have enough wax, you know, like if you got a little spot that, you know, doesn't seem to be waxing, like sometimes if you tighten your screws down too tight, you can kind of pull the insert a little bit and put a dimple in the bottom of the board. And definitely makes it a little harder to wax. You can always just take it, stick it on there real quick. Once you see it start dripping, just let it drip onto the board, and you know, you can always just reapply. You're gonna end up scraping any excess off anyway. But again, once you get everything smoothed out, this is where I like to kind of take this, and then I go on to the nose and tail, and I'll just kind of use those little drips that I had just to kind of smooth out on the nose and tail, and then I just kind of drag a little bit from the middle of the board, you know, up onto the nose and tail. And you know, again, get that, it's not super important, but you know, not a bad thing to do. Get that nose and tail. Put a good amount of wax on there, but again, it's not as important as the middle of the board here. So, boom, there's the nose. And this is where the iron is, the actual waxing irons are really nice, because when you go to push, the side of this iron being nice and rounded too, it actually, if you kind of push down a little bit, it actually helps get that wax kind of pushed towards the nose and helps move it around. So there we go. Always turn your iron off. Cool, so then from there, I just want to let the wax sit for a minute. You know, you can look in the light and you can actually see if there are some spots where, you know, you can actually tell if the wax is you know, still wet. You know, it'll look a little glossier, and you won't see any of this texture in the bottom of the board that you can see in it right now. But you know, just let it cool down for a minute. Next up, we're gonna scrape this thing. So, nice wide scraper. There's these plastic scrapers. There are some different sizes. You don't have to have the wide ones, but the wide ones for snowboards are definitely preferable, because obviously you can see it's gonna cover the entire board. So you're gonna do a little less scraping, but even if you've got some of the little narrower ones that are more portable, not a bad thing. You basically just need to get this wax off the board. So there's no wrong way, just get the wax off the board. Another pro tip too, garbage can right there. Scrape to your garbage can, right into it. That way you're a little less cleanup when you're done. So I like to just kind of give a little push. Kind of angle like that. I've seen people do it like this, like this. Again, doesn't matter as long as you're getting that wax off the board. Another pro tip that I like to do too is give it a little tap on the end of your board. You know, this wax is still gonna be a little sticky, especially if it's still warm when you're scraping it. But give it a couple taps on the tip of your board. Just kind of knock some of that wax off of the scraper. So, one, a little less cleanup when you're getting done with it, so you don't have those extra pieces of wax falling on the board as you're scraping, and also not falling off the side of the board. And it's all going into the garbage can. So you'll feel it'll start to smooth out. It won't be perfect, but it's definitely gonna get much, much smoother as you, the more you scrape. Another thing where you can use those lights too, and just kind of look in the light and you'll be able to see the spots where it hasn't been scraped yet. Having that light off to the side is definitely a nice thing. And obviously you're gonna be doing this in the light, so you'll have a light somewhere, but use it. Use the reflection of it in the board to help you see where it is. One thing that I like to do on the tips too, because the tips can be a little tricky, especially if of a board that's spooned out, like the you know, the Jones boards or the Burton boards, or some of the boards that have that three-dimensional shape in the nose and tail. So you can literally just take the scraper and kind of do little scrapes on the nose, just to get that little excess off. Another thing you can do to check on your scraping too is you actually feel the bottom of the board. You can feel spots that have not been scraped yet. It'll be nice and smooth, and all of a sudden you'll feel something that's rough, or actually feel a little bit more of a raised up spot, or even a little sticky spot too. That's always a telltale spot or a sign of a spot that still needs to be scraped. Okay. We got everything scraped. Board's nice and smooth. You got all that excess wax off the top of the board. Now all that's left is, you know, there's a tiny, very, very thin layer. That's fine. That's gonna pretty much wear off your first run anyway. But all that wax that's melted into the base, it is now in there, and your board's gonna be nice and fast. So we've got it smooth. You look in the light, you can actually see all your scrapes. And that's where a brush or a cork come into play. If you actually look on our website, I think we got right now, we got a Dakine actually does one that actually has cork on the backside, brush on the underside. I like the cork, I like the brush, I like either one. But this is basically just a nice way to kind of buff the board. You do it super fast with the cork, it really, really smooths things out. The brush actually helps, you know, it does help smooth it up a little bit too, but it also helps if you have those little pieces of wax from your scrapings on the board, it actually does help, you know, clean those off as well. If you try to rub them off, a lot of times you'll just push it into the board. So yeah, just give it a little bit of a brush, put a little pressure on it too, and go very, very quick. Really use the friction to help smooth everything out. And then one thing I like to do, especially with the cork, is give it a good hard drag tip to tail once you're done. Makes everything look nice and pretty. Boom. And your board is ready to ride. All right, so thanks for checking out the video on how to wax your board. And you know, we try to keep it simple, basically with the simple items that you can buy on our website. And there are other tools out there. You can do like deburring stones to help keep the edges nice and clean, get little burrs on them. You know, different kinds of files and all that stuff. But again, at the end of the day, as long as you've got, you know, an iron, as long as you've got some wax, and as long as you got a scraper, that'll keep you going all day long. If you have any other questions about you know, any of the stuff we used here or any of the stuff on the website in our tools section, leave us a comment down below. We're on there pretty much every day, answering all your questions, trying to, you know, get you into the right tools without having to work too crazy hard. Definitely like and subscribe to the channel. Get that bell on to find out when we got you know, new videos coming out. And get out and ride. You got these things waxed, might as well go out and ride them, because any day of riding is a good day of riding.